Hello, everybody. It's Daniel here. Let me pause to make sure it's totally live. It's still loading, I believe. Great. It's Daniel here. It's early July 2020 in Western North Carolina, traditional Cherokee lands, and I'm going to talk for 20, 30 minutes about work with the ancestors, and then we'll have some time for questions. I believe folks are able to send in a chat in that way, or a question. First off, we give acknowledgement to the ones who've come before us, who speak through this moment, for the beloved and kind and wise ancestors who support me, and ask that you help me to show up well in the teaching just now, and that you resource the work of the organization and everybody really who's leaning in with their people right now. So help this time to be useful. We acknowledge you. We want to talk with you, not just about you. Thanks. Ashe. So hey, I'm going to dive in and talk as if you don't know me and you don't know anything about the topic. So if neither of those are the case, it might feel redundant. But basically, if you're going to listen to somebody, I'd like to also. It's been a while since I've given an intro talk. That's what's happening. But I know this material really well, so hang with me. I want to say a thing about my own background because I know I want to hear that if I'm listening to somebody new for the first time. So I'm of early English, German, and a little bit Irish, early settler-colonialist ancestries to North America by way of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and now Western North Carolina. And I wasn't raised with any kind of framework for talking to dead people, but I sought it out years ago, just a background in ritual and ceremony, and I've pursued that since I got introduced to shamanism, paganism, ritual things when I was a teenager, which was actually really helpful and good. And I've followed up with it by being involved in different kinds of ceremonial spaces in North America and other places for the last 25 years. And I'm also a doctor of psychology and a marriage and family therapist, so I have the therapist training as well, which is actually really helpful. And I'm a bit of an amateur historian and naturalist in terms of my interests, and a dad and a husband and a regular person. So I have been teaching since 2004 other people how to come into conscious relationship with their ancestors, because we're already kind of in relationship with them. And that grows out of my own experience in the maybe 6 years before that of doing a deep dive with my own ancestors of blood and getting to know them in spirit in a way that never would have occurred to me if I wasn't prompted to do that by my first teachers in shamanism, paganism kinds of practices. And that planted really good seeds for me in the late 90s that have germinated since. And then I wrote a book about all this, and it got published in 2017, and I've been guiding multi-day ritual of ancestral healing and reconnection around the world now. It sounds a little dramatic, but 8 countries, and that started in 2005. So it's been a thing. I train people on how to guide this, and I'm steeped in it. The big frame that I hold myself, and there's not just one approach to all this, of course, for ancestral reconnection, ancestor reverence, ancestor ritual, that kind of thing, is animism, or animist as a orientation to life. And that's a technical way of saying that there's all kinds of people, not just other living humans. There's tree people and stone people, and you can call them people or not. They're just others who are intelligent kin. And obviously the plants and the animals, but also mountains, rivers, planets, elemental powers, weird deities and spirits and things like that. And among the others that we don't tend to automatically culturally invalidate, at least in the United States, therefore it's worth bringing this conscious, are the ancestors. And so the big frame is that the human dead or the ancestors are just people like us. They may not be incarnate right now, but nonetheless they have their own culture and trajectories and destiny and constitution and all that. So within a big animist framework, when we say who are the ancestors, because they're just one community that matters and that we might want to consider, they're all different kinds of ancestors. For one, I use the word to mean the human dead, the ones who are previously incarnate in human form, but are not incarnate right now. So they dwell in the present. They're not just memories, but the spirits or the souls of the not incarnate right now ones, which is a little more narrow of a definition than the trees and the wind and the sun are our ancestors. That's not false. That's also beautiful. It's true. There's a mystical, esoteric layers to that. And practically speaking, the kind of functional working definition is the humans who are not incarnate right now. And in that sense, the ancestors include the descendants. They're not, time is not linear, really. I mean, it's also linear, but not only. It's kind of a superficial layer of it. And so the ones returning are the same ones as the ones who have stepped out of form. And if we say the humans not incarnate right now are the ancestors, there's lots of different demographics within that population. There are ancestors that we're connected to through blood or body, and that's a demographic of ancestors a lot of people assume I'm talking about, or anybody's talking about when they say ancestors, and that's not false. And also, there are ancestors of vocation. If you're a painter, you might be connected to a lineage of painters. And ancestors of place or of land, the people who have been living and caring for land for generations before you got there. And ancestors of culture who are inspiring to you, your friends who pass, things like that. So within that, I do tend to focus on ancestors of blood, which are not exactly the same as ancestors of family, because a lot of people choose family. There's adoption, there's things like fertility technologies, and family's complicated, right? Even so, there's a benefit to including ancestors of blood or of body, not at the exclusion of people whose real sense of family comes from chosen or adoptive family. Those can also be ancestors. So narrowing in a bit on the topic of ancestors of blood. Within that, to narrow it even further, a lot of rituals around the world that engage with the ancestors can be real generally grouped into rituals of maintenance of a relationship that's already basically intact, or rituals that aim to repair or correct or address some kind of imbalance or trouble in those relationships. And most rituals are rituals of maintenance, in the sense that it's regular feeding, tending, making a space for the ancestors to speak, funerals, births, deaths, all that, weddings, times when you call in the ancestors to bear witness to a thing. Those are really about calling on them for a kind of relationship that's already functioning. And what's happened is it's been a really kind of disastrous for a lot of people last 500 at least, if not much longer, centuries. I know it's a mixed bag. I'm not generalizing about history, but I'm saying that European colonialism and the things that were occurring in Europe before that to cause a breakdown in culture that led to that colonialism have really taken a toll. It's been a tough couple centuries. And so the frameworks that are learned and transmitted to relate with the ancestors have often broken down, not only for European ancestor people, but also at times for people who were either enslaved by Europeans for a period of time or who experienced intense genocidal disruption of culture and land in the Americas, or people in other places than North America. There's a lot of conditions by which one can be raised and not be equipped with a framework culturally to relate with the ancestors as a normal thing. And so when those frameworks break down, it's relevant to come with a more repair-oriented approach to relating with the ancestors, because you have to first rewire the connection. or reclaim the ability as a living person to relate with them, and then simultaneously address what kind of state they're in. Because you could be really clearly communicating with a quite troubled energy. And that's not a communication problem, that's a quality of energy problem. So most of what I've ended up teaching, even though this wasn't a life goal when I was like a teenager, is to help people to reclaim a framework for rituals of repair with blood lineage ancestors. So let's talk about that very specific ritual application. And the approach that I'll describe totally arises from a context where these basic understandings were fragmented or lost. I wasn't raised with it. I had to search about it. The good side of that is that I learned a thing thoroughly by really sinking into it, and I learned implicitly that it's learnable. And if it's learnable, it's teachable. So now I teach it. And if you weren't raised with the framework, it's relevant to ask, so what are the underlying assumptions here? What are the givens? I don't think of it as beliefs, but what are the working premises, plural, of the approach? There are 4 or 5. So the first is that something continues after the body dies. It's not necessarily just one thing, but there is some kind of continuity of consciousness. And the aspects, or the aspect of the soul, or whatever we are that continues, that's the ancestors. That, if things go well, becomes part of the larger body of the ancestors. And so we're not only the body. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have a very embodied life. I'm not saying there's some valuing of the spirit over flesh or something like that, but we're not only the physical. A second premise is that not all the dead are equally well and at peace. Like, really, this is important. A lot of folks underappreciate the importance of this. It's actually the way in which my approach to ancestor work, when it differs, will tend to differ from the way others approach it. Is I tend to start from an assumption that things are not necessarily safe and then work backwards from there. Meaning that just dying doesn't make you wise and kind and loving. It means you're not incarnate anymore. If someone's just a destructive shit of a person during life and they die, they don't just become loving and wise automatically. No, nobody I know sees it that way. That's not what I see. It's not what I've learned from anybody. And so there's a need to use discernment. Just because someone is not incarnate doesn't make them an ancestor. Now this gets into how we use the word. In the broad sense, the word ancestor refers to the not incarnate right now ones. So I'm going to make the use a little more narrow now and say ancestors are those among the dead who have actually assumed that status or made the transition to become an ancestor, unlike those among the dead who are ghosts, or most generously not yet ancestors. They've died, but they haven't finished the rite of passage that begins with the death of the body, so they haven't been received by the other ancestors. There's not a sense of being settled into their new state. Those are the ones who it's not helpful, in my way of holding the work at least, to relate with directly. They're ones that we aim to assist, but we don't assist them by trying to connect directly with them. So not all the dead are equally healed and wise and kind. It's just like the living in that way. That said, they change. Just because someone was a mess during life doesn't mean they're going to perpetually hang out in that state forever. They could for a while, but it's also quite possible that they enjoy some healing and they work it out after death. Even if you don't forgive them, even if you don't like them, even if you think they should suffer because they caused harm during life, nonetheless, we are not the arbiters of whether or not people get into heaven, so to speak, or whether or not people work shit out. So they might work it out even if you haven't forgiven them. And they can shift and be in a better state. That doesn't mean that there isn't a benefit to making a repair, or that there isn't some kind of, ultimate accountability in a sense, but I don't know that that is always so personalized in the way it plays out. So the dead can run the full spectrum from harmful to awesome, and they can change. They can heal and change and work it out. Ideally, we allow for that to happen, but it doesn't always happen that way. A fourth assumption about the relationship between the living and the dead that tends to hold across a lot of cultures is that the living and the dead can communicate. And it's not even that spiritual necessarily. It is possible that the ancestors come in a way that's really, oh my God, like striking and potent. But it could also just be like they're talking to you and you hear them like you would in an otherwise incarnate kind of conversation. And it's not inherently helpful. It's not inherently welcome when the dead speak. But if it's the dead who are wise and kind and loving, and it's welcome, then it can be actually fantastic and be life-saving guidance or comfort or healing or whatever it might be. So communication is possible. It can be spontaneous or intentional. They can initiate it, we can initiate it. There can totally be misunderstanding, but that's like living humans. We can communicate too and totally miss each other, but not always. And finally, the level of influence between us and them, between the living and the dead, who are not really dead, but they're not incarnate right now ones, which isn't as poetic as saying the dead in English. The level of impact between us and them is really is substantial. It's not to be minimized. I see it this way. I'm a doctor of psychology, I'm a therapist, so I have that background. And from that perspective, it looks like this to me. It looks like a lot, maybe a majority of what people suffer with psychologically can be understood as intergenerational influence, and certainly as the impact of culture in different ways, which is itself the body of the ancestors. And the influence can be helpful or harmful. And just because it's not conscious, just because we're not thinking of them in this way, doesn't mean the influence isn't happening. From someone who sees the world through a very ancestral lens, or sees living people as a face of a bigger ancestral network, it looks to me like most people are experiencing unconscious ancestral influence, which doesn't make it bad. When your people are ethical and wise and kind, or however they are, what's awesome about them, those gifts often reverberate or continue through your life and shine through your life in a way that's adaptive, beautiful, so good, and not always attributed to an inherited positive legacy from your people, but which may be that nonetheless. Of course, the flip of that, and an incentive to engage more consciously with the dead, is that unhelpful inheritances also can be passed along. They can skip generations, they can take a lot of forms, and that includes the unpaid debts culturally of our people and the troubles that they enacted but never made a repair around. So a lot of that gets passed along to the future generations if it isn't worked out. So something continues after you die. Not all the dead are equally at peace. They can change. We can communicate with them. And the level of impact between us and them is substantial. It's worth reckoning with. That's what I hold to be foundational to the work. So if there's some fundamental disconnect around any of those things, then my approach might not land for you. A final thing I want to say is actually what we do, what I guide people in. I say we because there are a good number of other people trained in this approach to the work as well. And this is in the book, the Ancestral Medicine book. This middle heart of the book are these steps. It's in the online course that starts this Friday. It's open till July 28th, I believe. And it's in the process that you would engage with if you worked with one of the practitioners in the practitioner directory. And it's what we used to do back in the day when we could meet in person and do multi-day ritual before the wheels fell off the bus of the world and we entered a global pandemic. So the process is pretty structured and pretty predictable in that way. And there's 5 steps, and they go like this. And this is, we do a slowed down version of these steps in the 14 lessons of the online course, which some other elements involved. The first of the 5, assess what's actually going on with your ancestors. And when I say your ancestors, I mean your blood lineage ancestors. And I tend to consider 4 bloodlines or invite people to do that. So your 2 grandparents and the lineage of women before your grandmas and men before your grandpas on your dad's side and your mom's side. In saying that, I know that the language is very much rooted in the binary. And I'll say that we are looking at a body level lineage of sperm and egg, to be a little less poetic about it. I'm not making assumptions when I present the work in this way that looks at lineages. I'm not making assumptions about the sexual orientation, about the gender expression, about or even really the gender identity of these folks. And I know that the language is binary in that way. And so for folks who are non-binary, genderqueer, trans, in any way not cisgendered or gender conforming, know that the way the work is actually held is quite intentionally inclusive and body oriented, and recognizes that gifts like being not straight or not gender conforming are often ancestrally inherited gifts as well. And that everybody, all you listening, everybody has got queer ancestors in all kinds of ways, whether or not they called themselves that when they were alive. So the first step is to actually look at those 4 lineages and wonder, how are they in spirit, in the present? Are your people already in this really vibrant, healed, awesome condition along any given lineage? If they are, that's fucking great, fantastic. Just love them. Take in their blessings. Don't fix anything because it doesn't need fixed. If it's anything other than that, then the invitation is to temporarily have a boundary with them, meaning just have them not up right in your body space until the healing can occur, so that the healing process is set in motion. And then determine which lineage you're going to focus on for the process. So I tend to invite people to look at a lineage at a time. It's a scale of engagement that's more group level than just individual dead people, but it's not all the dead, which is a lot. It's too broad. It's like relating with humans too much. So you look at your lineages, you see which one you're going to focus on. Set boundaries with them where needed. That's the first step. The second is to connect with the older ones, the ones who are before remembered names, and often before colonialism or before big cultural disruptions. So let's say the last ones who during life openly practice ancestor reverence as an everyday kind of thing. Depending on where your people are from, that could still be happening in your family. It could be just 3 generations back. It could be 35 generations back. So you connect directly in spirit with those ones and basically ask them to intervene and say, whoa, we got a problem here. Things culturally went off the tracks. There's a lot of ghosty heaviness in the system. I need your help. So you ask those old ones to step in. I'm shortening the process because I want to get to questions here in a minute. That second step of connecting with the ancestral guides and receiving their blessing leads to the third and fourth step of healing up the lineage between them and you, from the old ones to the recent dead, and asking the ones who live before remembered names to be welcomed into the lineage. And it's the older ancestors who do that. We're not presuming to know what's needed. The old ones guide the process. And then once they're well, we ask them to receive in the recent dead, which gets more tender when you're asking your deceased father, for example, or son to be received up by these ancient grandfathers. And once that's happened, which is to say that all the dead along the lineage of focus who were not previously received have been woven in and received, then you ask the ancestral guides and the lineage as a whole to really bless your own body and life and help you to comfortably be the face of that lineage, to live those gifts, to allow their love to flow through you, to bless the living family and beyond. It doesn't mean you can't have boundaries with living family if they're dangerous people, but you come current as their face here. And then do that with the other lineages until you're no longer in a place of ancestral deficit and there's not ancestral repair needed so much as maintenance of an ongoing relationship. That's the short version of the heart of the ancestral lineage repair work. There are other things I teach too, so other things we touch on in the course, but that 5-step process is kind of where it's at. There's a lot that can happen in the process. Final comment, then, if there are questions, if folks are actually tuned in here, it's hard to know. I'm not used to this interface still a bit on Facebook, but if you have questions, it's good to start to type them in the chat, and I'll respond to them if you want. But a final thing is that I started teaching it to others in 2004 or 5, but it was maybe, I don't know, 8 years ago or maybe more that I started to understand a little better some of the cultural implications. And we could do a whole other series of talks about this, but I'll say that getting to know your own ancestors of blood, depending on who you are and where you're from, has important implications for things like decolonization, culturally, like spiritually, not directly around like repatriation of land and things like that, because that's very much important, for transforming racism, which is both systemically and interpersonally and intra-psychically ancestral superiority thinking. It has implications for transforming feminism, homophobia, transphobia, different kinds of problematic gender binaries and just misuse of sexual energy, patterns like that are often intergenerational and cultural. And for healing our connection to the rest of life, to the earth, to the sacred. Our ancestors knew how to navigate that, generally speaking, not in a way that idealizes the past, but when people live closer to the land, there's a tendency to recognize that who's underwriting your life and whose bodies you're eating to live, those are also people. They're also part of your extended family. You need to be right with them if you're going to have enough to eat. And so it is possible to re-enliven a relational value set to live from by looking to our ancestors for inspiration about that. Even if your people are, like me, really have been living for a while divorced from that framework. So a final thing is that the course itself, and then I'll go to some of the questions, there's a few coming through at least, it's a 14-week course. We have a lot of accessibility around scholarships if the cost is a barrier. And we have 20 ritual supporters who are people I've worked with and have trained in this work, helping to hold small breakout groups during the live calls. They're 14 90-minute live calls. And there's an additional 14 extra calls for Australia, Oceania time zone, for if you're in Australia, New Zealand, or if you're just up in the middle of the night and want to join in an extra live call to share with others where I'm not there. And then there's an additional third live call for any course participants who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, just to have a break from white people for a minute and to get to have relaxed BIPOC ritualist, lightly moderated discussion and nurturing space for your work with your people. So that's how we're holding the vessel. It's a good group. It's our fifth, sixth time of guiding the course, and I'm a teacher at heart, and so we care about the pedagogy and the learning, and that it's accessible and learnable. So that's a bit about the course, and let me see if anybody here has some questions. Oh, there are people writing in. Oh, good. I see one person saying the work seems intellectually interesting and important, and I'm not sure I have the capacity to receive messages or connect with the ancestors myself. And so there's and I did some of the exercises of the book, was waiting for something to happen. Yeah, totally. I wrote that book and I put those exercises in there knowing that most people aren't going to have success with them in that format. I wouldn't tend to have success with that. Most people, myself included, do way better having someone else hold a space for you. There's something on just a human level where it's like, it's possible, but it's hard to just pick up like an instruction manual on how to reconnect with the ancient grandmothers in your lineage and be like, okay, maybe if you're in a really cracked open state, maybe if you've done a lot of ritual, then you know how to apply that. So in that way, some people inevitably are like, this actually works. Let me apply it. Thanks. No need to meet. Peace out. And for a lot of other people, individual session work with the practitioners is really a very efficient way to have the direct experience and to be resourced in that. If you, the person who wrote in, or anybody really is drawn to that, and the cost of the sessions, and everybody sets their own rates for their practice, is prohibitive in any way, we also have a low-income session form that can be filled out, and you can be paired with one of the practitioners. So it's a commitment of me and also the organization and the practitioners to keep the work accessible. So I would try that, and just know that if the connection isn't coming quickly or easily, the way I see that is it's a function itself of cultural damage. I don't mean it in a judgy way. It's just that if you weren't supported and raised with the thing, how could you expect yourself to know it? Yeah. I was just writing the other day, my father and both of his brothers and all 5 of their other sons all know about cars. And I was expected as a dude to know about cars, and I don't. I still don't. And there's a sense that I should just like know that because I'm male, and I don't. I don't even mind that I don't know it. And we do that with ourselves sometimes around things like connecting with the ancestors. I should just know it. Like if no one ever taught you to swim, they throw you in the water, you might feel ashamed because other people know how to swim, but somebody taught them. They learned. And so that's a place to bring a lot of kindness to yourself around, and to know that having just somebody support you with it usually gets the best results. It's okay to be tenacious about it. Thanks. Let me go to another question that comes up. I noticed that I have anger, resentment about ancestral karma I'm holding, and that creates a resistance to connect with those lines. Grief and forgiveness work could be helpful. Is that something we do in the course? Oh yeah, totally. There's a whole section on grieving and forgiveness and all that. Absolutely. And we don't jump to it. We actually at no point ever, even for the people I'm training in the work, even for myself or anybody, I don't ever recommend relating with the dead who are troubled directly. You can do it. I've done it. Like it's a thing you can do, but it's not needed ritually. And yet, assisting them is a fundamental part of my life and destiny and the work of the organization, the practitioners, and all of it. They're absolutely a sort of target demographic to get them what they need. So, method-wise, we're connecting only with the much older ancestors, or if your recent people are awesome with them, and asking them to intervene. And so we don't actually have to be the ones to hold the recent dead in judgment. Often they're very judgment worthy in terms of how they've lived. But the main thing is to get them in spirit, in present, in a more healed condition. And then accountability, repairs, possibly tangible reparations can be addressed for actions where they failed to show up well for life. But I'm not going to ask anybody to relate with folks who've been harmful during life unless those ones have clearly entered into a very healed and beneficial condition. Then it's an option, but not a pressure to relate with them. Hope that speaks to it, yeah. Another question, is there a best practice to contact the older, well ancestors? Yeah, and the person goes on to ask, I'm exploring my incarnation relationship between spirit and matter, interested in using ancestral medicine to foster this process. Is that a fair assumption that it would? Yeah, I think so about that. I don't want to assume too much how you mean it, but if you're saying about being here and being really embodied in the world while still being connected to the sacred, yeah, for sure. Ancestor work is good in that way because you're taking human form and seeing the sacred in it. And it's usually the hardest kind of thing to see as sacred because most people's most core pain comes from other humans. So there's not just one way to seek to connect with the older ones, or more specifically those who are very healed and well. In some sense, it's very simple. You just, may you all step forward. I want to connect with awesome older ancestors. Hey, show up. Proceed to listen. Sometimes it's that simple. Beyond that, it's nice to have a bit of a framework. Like in the training manual for people that I teach how to guide this work for others, there's one section where there's like 15 different things that can go wrong and ways to work with it. So there's a lot of different kinds of challenges that can occur. But the first starting approach is setting clear intent, really tending to ritual protection and safety, and then seeking to connect with only ones who are really healed and in a good way. Yeah. See a question. I'm a holistic trauma-informed therapist. Will this course enable me to hear from my ancestors in the course of my work? Yeah. I mean, I think so. That's the intent. I can never... I'm always slow to promise a certain outcome because at the end of the day, I can't make the dead do anything. But yes, the scope of the course is not to train people how to guide the work for others. However, it is within the scope to have the participants, you, whoever, be really deeply in communion and regular support and have the tools to take care of that regular relationship with your own ancestors. And that includes not just in your free time, but while you're parenting, while you're with your partner, while you're with your clients. And to feel them backing you and guiding you in whatever you're doing in your life. So that's absolutely a reasonable goal and a good motivation to seek what we're teaching about. Another question, I feel a little nervous about encountering troubled ancestors while on this path. Could engaging these ghosts create upheaval and discomfort in my life? Well, what usually happens is it doesn't tend to get worse. I put it that way. And avoiding the topic altogether is not actually an effective strategy for protection from them. It's kind of like if you didn't wash your hands or wear a mask or do anything, be like, I'm just afraid that if I think about germs, they're going to get on me. You can approach it that way, but thinking about them a certain amount will actually help you to be safer from them. I'm not giving you a hard time. I don't mean to do that, but I'm saying that what can happen occasionally is that once you start to set limits with the troubled dead, and like, I love you all, may you get what you need, but I can't have ghosts up in my space. You got to take like 6 steps back and get out of my aura, and I'll pray for you and let's get you healing, but you can't just like eat my life. Once you do that move of having some boundaries, sometimes there's a little turbulence because things are reorganizing. But that doesn't tend to be lasting, and it tends to be for the best. And once the healing gets more underway, then it tends to be a longer term fix for that interference. So no, we talk a lot about boundaries in the course, and not just talk about it, but the intent is to help people to set healthy boundaries with any among the dead who are just not good to have right up in your space. So it's an important consideration, and it's really foreground in how we approach things. That's a good question. Yeah, I think all the questions that have come through have been responded to. We can finish here in a moment. If anyone else is live, which I don't have a feel for how many people it is, wants to ask something, you're welcome to. Let's see if there's anything else that I want to add. We have a fun time with the course. And so I aim to hold a learning space in an environment that's really chilled out and not shaming, not uptight, is welcoming to beginners and welcoming to like experienced witches and mystics who are sort of ashamed to actually be learning from someone else. And so there's a whole spectrum and mixture of people in the course, so that's all welcome. There's a good question comes through, and I'll touch on that, and then I think we'll wrap up. I'm currently living, the person says sorry to not name you, it's going in the recording. I'm currently living on Anishinaabe land, colonized by my people, early settler ancestors to North America. I'm curious about the work in helping me to contribute to reconciliation between indigenous and non-indigenous peoples, as that's the focus of my professional life. Yeah, it helps in that regard. As I said earlier, it's not a substitute for all the tangible kinds of things. There's an important piece which I mostly agree with of decolonization is not a metaphor, so it's good to keep it tangible in that way. And a lot of the harms that we're trying to work out individually are really inherited harms. It's like me and my people enacted harm toward you and your people. And how do I individually participate in making repair around that? Well, if it's me and my people, because you're actually in relationship with them in the present, it's quite possible, and I've witnessed it a lot of times, where things get to the point where it's like we are really fucking sorry for how we showed up. And it hurts our heart that we haven't made repairs around that. And we, not just me, want to proactively spend energy in this precious life to make it better and to help and to participate in that repair together. Let us move forward together. Coming to that place of recognizing that the stuff we're trying to shift, the systemic stuff, but also the interpersonal bad blood and also the internalized racism and funk, we're down lineage from a bigger system. We're not just individuals. The ancestral troubles call for including the ancestors in how we resolve them. And they want to be included for the most part. And so I think it opens up all kinds of really beautiful possibilities. Some of those are spontaneous, like the U.S. Army veterans who made a moving apology at Standing Rock at one point that went viral a bit to the tribal elders there for the harms of the U.S. Army and some of their own ancestors had committed toward indigenous people. So there are moments like that that can emerge. But also it's allowing your ancestors to guide you on what is a real humble and efficient and wise way to participate in the repairs. So yeah, I think it's good. And there's a lot of space to talk about that in the course and to bring that. So thank you for asking about it. And to the final question, it is my habit to connect with a different set or group or expression of healed ancestral energy along whatever given lineage of focus you're working with. So if it's 4 lineages, then yeah, it would be 4 different ancestral guides or teachers or expressions of wholeness. And that recognizes that we're down lineage from a lot of different things, and that we're a mixture of a lot of different sacred qualities. So it's a delight of the work to get to know those different aspects of the sacred. Thanks, everybody. The link, let me go ahead and put it in here for the, if one person on our team is actually in the call, could you drop the link to the course in the chat, please? That would be helpful. I just don't want to get sucked in with it. But all the info is on the website, and if you have questions, let us know. And if you decide you sign up and you're like, oh my God, I don't like it, then we'll give you your money back for I think we have a month policy on that. So we're not primarily motivated by the money around it. We're just trying to support a team and a course. So thanks. Hope you would consider joining us. Thanks to the ancestors for being good. Help us through this moment we're in right now. Ashe.